Welcome to worship at Bart Centenary United Methodist Church in Littlestown, Pennsylvania. I'm your pastor, Tammy Blos, and I'm so glad that you came today. Our reading today comes from Genesis chapter 37. We'll focus on verses 1 through 4 and 12 through 28, but we'll also read verses 5 through 11. Hear the word of the Lord. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There were binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream, and he told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture his father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. And he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But then Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with the sleeves that he wore, and they took him and they threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I wonder how many of you can identify with Joseph, with being the favorite child. Were you the youngest and the cutest? Were you the oldest and the one your father liked to do outdoor activities or sports like things with, as you left the others behind? Or were you one of those who was left behind? Were you daddy's little girl, the princess of the palace? Or were you jealous of those favorite ones? If you can identify with any one of those questions, the story of Joseph and his brothers has a little bit in it just for you. Joseph's story, of course, begins with Jacob and his wives. You might remember Jacob's great love for Rachel and Laban's deception, which resulted in Jacob's marriage to Leah and 1 week later to Rachel. You may also remember Laban's marriage gifts to his daughters, the handmaids Zilpah and Bilhah. Jacob fathered children by all 4 of these women. Jacob's children by his respective wives were as follows. Leah, Jacob's first wife, bore Reuben, who was the firstborn. Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Gad and Asher. Rachel, who was, of course, Jacob's first love, bore Joseph and Benjamin, and she died in childbirth with Benjamin. Bilhah, Rachel's maid, bore Dan and Naphtali. Joseph's dramatic story is told in episodes throughout the chapters 37 through 50 of Genesis. It is a story of dramatic rises and falls in the life of this 11th of 12 sons of Jacob, who has been renamed Israel. From these 12 sons, the tribes of Israel will come. It begins, as many family tales in Genesis do, with favoritism. Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, and just like in the previous stories, the favoritism leads to problems. In this case, it inspires hatred for Joseph from his brothers. The jealous brothers do not only resent Joseph for his preferred treatment, like his special coat, the one that signified his position as the favored one, but they also resent Joseph for his own behavior. You see, Joseph has dreams. Not only does he have them, but he proudly shares those dreams. The problem with this is that he proclaims or predicts that all of his brothers and even his parents will one day bow down to him. This is too much, even for his father, and Israel reprimands Joseph for such talk. It is this combination of behavior from young favored Joseph and resentment from his older brothers because of Israel's favoritism that leads to the horrifying, remorseless, and compassionless actions of Joseph's brothers in today's text. Indeed, verses 19 through 20 foreshadow the ending of the Joseph cycle. There we read, "They said to one another, 'Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and then we shall see what will become of his dreams.'" What those of us who have skipped ahead already know is that What will become of his dreams is that they will come true. Joseph's power in Egypt will save the lives of his family, and they will come and bow down to him. Unfortunately, his brothers don't know that when, without compassion or remorse, they consider murdering him in cold blood. And though one brother's words save him from that particular fate, Joseph is still thrown into a pit, one with no water. Well, this fate protects Joseph from drowning, but leaves him to a fate of dying of thirst. After doing this, his brothers cheerfully sit down and enjoy a meal together. Later, they take advantage of an opportunity that walks right in front of them when they sell Joseph into slavery to a band of traveling traders. This disturbing episode of violence and betrayal will in the future become the vehicle to survival of Israel's family, of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In Joseph's story, we see God's providence at work. It becomes clear in the words of the closing chapter. Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. Through Joseph's story, we learn the ways that suffering and triumph are linked together, and that God is present in the midst of both the good and the bad moments of our lives. The great African American author and poetess, Maya Angelou, writes about overcoming the heritage of slavery and prejudice in her moving poem entitled Still I Rise. As we read it, it is easy to relate her words to the life of Joseph, a slave in Egypt. She writes, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. Bring the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise." Now, I cannot compare my own difficulties to those of a slave, or even to the descendant of a slave, but I have to ask myself, can I face my own difficulties with this kind of confidence? Can you? Can we capture the spirit of Joseph as this poem does? Can you and I have the kind of confidence in our God that through God we can rise despite the pitfalls of life? As Dr. Mickey Anders designates in a sermon titled From the Pit to the Pinnacle in 2008, that also features this poem, the Bible is full of stories of people who rose from the pit to the pinnacle. Moses, the child of promise, raised in Pharaoh's house, murders an Egyptian and finds himself an outcast in the land of Midian. But there, he sees a burning bush. He hears the call of God, and he returns to Egypt to free God's people. Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, and yet when the morning light came, he had survived. Peter had a career filled with ups and downs with Jesus. In the crucial moment, Peter denied 3 times that he even knew Jesus. He was crushed with shame and humiliation. But after the forgiveness from Jesus came, Peter went on to lead the entire church. On the road to Damascus, Saul was prepared to persecute Christians. But he was struck down, made blind. For days he could not see. But he emerged from this experience a transformed man who went on to write half of our New Testament scriptures and build more of the church than anyone could have ever imagined. Jesus himself was tortured and crucified. He was killed on a cross on Calvary. But 3 days later, on Easter morning, he rose again. Friends, we must face the pitfalls in life, confident that God has not given us a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit of power and love and self-discipline. Then we too can rise from the pit to the pinnacle. When we hear the promise of God and we recognize the power of God to help us to overcome, we too will be like Joseph, like Moses, like Daniel and Peter and Paul, and yes, even like Jesus. We too are given the power of resurrection. We too can know that God is with us in the good times when we rise up to the top, and that God is with us in the bad times when we find ourselves in a pit, regardless of whether that pit is one that we have been thrown into by others, that we have stumbled into by accident, or one that we have stubbornly dug on our own. God had plans for his people. And those plans included getting Joseph to the right place in Egypt to save them from a famine that they never could have predicted. And God has plans for his people today. Those plans include placing you in the right place at the right time to do your part in God's great plan. So regardless of whether you are currently standing at the top or find yourself struggling to remove yourself from a pit, know that God is there with you, that God has a purpose and a plan for you, and that with God's help, you too will rise. Amen.